And then one day, we were going to do the pontoons. We were marching off to do the pontoons. Two guys stood on a tree stump, and basically tried to knock each other off. And I liked that. So they stopped us, and they called out 10 names, mine being one of them. I was like pissed, and then they marched us off to personnel. And one by one, you went into a room. So you didn't know what was going on until you went into that room, So I finally go into that room, I sit down, and the guy goes, yeah, well, we're going to send you to MP school. I said, MP school? I said, you're kidding, right? And he goes, well, it's either that or 11 Bravo. And everybody knew 11 Bravo was the bush.
Ask a Vet is dedicated to documenting and preserving veteran stories in their own words on their own terms before their stories are gone forever. Each episode is an unfiltered conversation about who they were before service during war and their adjustment to coming home. If you believe these stories matter, please subscribe, like, comment, and share. Your support helps us preserve the voices of those who served. Ask a Vet is proud to partner with Utah Honor Flight, part of the National Honor Flight Network, giving veterans the trip of a lifetime to Washington, D.C. to visit the memorials built in their honor. Every flight is free to veterans and made possible by generous donors. To learn more or support the mission, visit utahhonorflight.org or find your local hub at honorflight.org. And now back to the show.
Paul Colliton, born and raised in Long Island, New York, 1951. One of 6 kids, Irish Catholic.
Military family?
Yes. Both my parents were in World War II. My mother was a nurse. My father was a lieutenant in charge of a battery of guns on the West Coast. Both of them never went over to Europe. My mother, I think, was in Texas. They didn't talk about it much, But my father went to West Point and then ended up becoming gunnery, lieutenant for a gunnery battery. They thought, they were going to get attacked by Japanese, right? And so they, he was in Berkeley or something like that with the battery of guns.
Wow, that's it. I didn't know they'd had that going then.
Yeah, sure. The whole West Coast was full of bunkers and all that good stuff.
But they never really talked about it much.
My parents never did, yeah. I was named after, my full name is Paul O'Neill Peter Colliton. Peter's the confirmation name. And, but I'm named after my mother's cousin. So my mother was an only child. She lived in a 2-family house where her uncle and 3 boys lived upstairs. And her and her mother and father lived downstairs in Quincy, Massachusetts. And my mother's best friend was the oldest of the O'Neills upstairs, Paul O'Neill, who became a B-24 bomber pilot and was shot down over the English Channel, never to be found, and all 9 crew members. And my mother and the 2 other brothers all named a son after him.
Wow.
So I'm Paul O'Neill Peter Colliton, and I'm the oldest. I'm also the shortest. The rest of them are like 6'2", 6'4", stuff like that. There's only 2 of us left. One of them just passed away. But yeah, so I always kind of like had that thing about it, about being named after my Uncle Paul. My mother, even though they were cousins, my mother treated him like her brother,
And how did you end up in Vietnam?
Yeah. So, I let myself get drafted, basically. As I mentioned, my mother was a nurse in World War II. And so my oldest brother, I have 2 older brothers. My oldest brother went off to Vietnam, I think in 69 or 68. And he had, he was in the Navy. He also volunteered for Vietnam. He was quartermaster, which meant he steered the boat, right? So he was on the USS Observation, which was the sister ship to the Pueblo. It started the whole thing in Nam, right?
Okay.
And he was bored or something. I don't know. I never got a straight answer out of him either. And he volunteered for Nam. So he went and I have a great picture of him on a Boston whaler, on a 16-foot Boston whaler, right, with 50 cal in his hand and a dog, and so he had troubles. He went MIA once for like 4 days, and really kind of got my family, but. Me,
And how much older was he?
He's 40, we're all Irish twins, right?
Okay.
So we're all 18 months apart, so he's like 4 years older than me, or just about 4 years older than me, because he was the oldest, and there was my other brother and then me. The brother just older than me, he went into the National Guard, to get away from the draft, right? But I was like, basically drinking and drugging my youth away, and the only thing I had going for me was my girlfriend, and I was working on Wall Street. So, like I said, I grew up in Long Island, so I would take the train in. We would take the train in, and I would walk her to FIT, which is oddly enough right across the street from here, from Penn Station, right, which is right down the block, right up the block. And then I would get into the subway and head off to Wall Street. And by noon, I was up in Harlem buying drugs, and then coming back and just squandering the rest of the day away. And my father was the vice president, so nobody really said anything to me. I was just like, yeah, leave him alone, And then I would take the train back to Long Island, get into my T-shirt and jeans, and drink until 4 a.m, and then do the whole thing all over again.
And you're 18? How old are you?
I was 18.
18.
Into my 19. Into 19.
Yeah.
And then when I was 19, all of a sudden I got I ran into a friend of my older brother's, right? This guy, Stephen Tremper.
Yeah.
And he said to me, hey, I think you got a low number in the lottery. I go, what lottery? He goes, the draft, you idiot. I saw they're still doing that. Is that war still going on? I mean, that's how out of it I was,
If you or someone you know isn't getting the VA benefits you've earned, click the link in our description. We've teamed up with a group of experts that help veterans build stronger VA claims and get the benefits they deserve. Click the link in our description for a free consultation.
And so, 3 days after that guy said that to me, I got the letter. Greetings, And my mother got me 3 letters from 3 prominent doctors to get me out, right? One of them would have done it. And I didn't show them. Right? To this day, I wish I kept those letters. But, I didn't show them, and I got drafted,
Why didn't you show them?
Because I was kind of in a rut, and I saw what my parents went through, how, prominent they were in my hometown, I think both my mother and father had been asked to run for mayor of the town, several times, and, my father was vice president of an insurance company on Wall Street, I didn't know at the time that he was kind of a drunk too. I didn't find that out until later. But I thought, maybe I could use some discipline in my life, it took me a month to realize that I made a mistake, but, I did that.
Where did you go?
I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey, right? And I immediately excelled. I had been the kid in school who fought all the time because I was dyslexic. I am dyslexic, but I also stuttered as a kid. So I was always getting into fights. You made fun of me, we were fighting, you know? So I went to 3 different schools, because of my temper, right? And the dyslexia, in the 50s and 60s, they didn't know about that stuff. So I was just stupid, I mean, when I was in Catholic school, I actually sat on a stool in a corner with a dunce cap on my head, like with kids hitting me with spitballs, and so they didn't really have, the knowledge that they have today, so but in the Army, it was a different story. I got to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and I became a platoon leader. I was a sharpshooter. I maxed the rifle. I could read a map, because that's how I did everything. I did a lot of things visually, because I couldn't read, And then one day, we were going to do the pontoons. We were marching off to do the pontoons. And I really liked that. You sat, 2 guys stood on a tree stump, and basically tried to knock each other off. And I liked that, So they stopped us, though, and they said, okay. And they called out 10 names, mine being one of them. I was like pissed, and then they marched us off to personnel. And one by one, you went into a room and you went out a back door. So you didn't know what was going on until you went into that room, So I finally go into that room. I sit down and the guy goes, yeah, well, we're going to send you to MP school. I said, MP school? I said, you're kidding, right? I mean, do you know my background? I mean, I got, Grand Theft Auto, all kinds of stuff, what are you talking about? And he goes, well, it's either that or 11 Bravo. And everybody knew 11 Bravo was the Bush, Nam, right? So I said, okay, I'll take it. I said, but why? Why me and these 9 other guys? And he said, well, you tend to have the highest IQ on base right now. I was like, what? I have a high IQ, because, I always equated it to intelligence, but I knew I was smart. I could put together a crystal set. I could do I once took apart, when I was like 5 years old, I dragged a washing machine and a dryer into the garage that my parents were throwing out, took them apart and put them back together, right? And made them work, right? So I knew I was smart. But, I wasn't book smart. I wasn't like school smart, So anyways, that was a shocker. And then I went off to Fort Gordon, Georgia. That's where I learned to be an MP. And
what happened there? What was that training like?
A lot of acid.
What was there?
Yeah. It's like my best friend was this guy, John Marvel, right? Of course, we call him Captain Marvel. Right?
Yeah.
And he was into acid. So me and him and his girlfriend would like drop acid a lot. But it was very strenuous, like work. I treated it like a job. I treated it like I did basic, excelled at things,
Were they yelling at you the same way?
No, it was different. And AIT was much different than basic,
At that point, did you know you were going to Vietnam?
No, not yet. Yeah, not for the first month at least. I don't know when we found out, when we were going, but it came,
And what year was this?
71.
Okay.
Yeah.
And at this point, you still don't know much about what's going on in Vietnam, you personally, or did you? Yeah.
No, yeah. I mean, I knew it was a war that we didn't want to be in, I demonstrated in Washington, D.C. in my senior year, with hair down to here, and got shot at by the D.C. cops, I was with my friend, I was with my friend's older brother. What was his name again? Ford was their last name, but there were so many of them. His brother, Andrew, was my friend. Mark Ford. I was with him. He had a Volkswagen. Bullet came through the windshield, not the back. I was like, he thought they're shooting at us, So, that was the year before I went to Nam. And so that's about all I knew about it, that we were fighting the commies and it wasn't really our fight. We shouldn't be there, blah, blah, blah. What are we doing? We're killing people. Pretty much what we're doing today.
Yeah.
And, and it's like, so, but I was in there now. I'm in the Army and I'm going to be an MP. And
you like the officers training you?
I did, not in basic, although I did respect them. I had my drill sergeant, Johnson, was 2 or 3 time Vietnam, tourist. And he had malaria, so his face was like kind of messed up. But I respected him. I liked him,
Did he tell tales about Vietnam or no?
If he did, I never heard him, I mean, I didn't really think about it. I did my roommate, at first we were in barracks, but then we got put into rooms with one other guy, and my roommate came down with spinal meningitis. And so I came home for a weekend. Like I said, my mother was a nurse. I came home for the weekend and I told my mother that my roommate had spinal meningitis. She goes, "You're not going back there, until you see my doctor." Right. And I go, "Mom, it's the fucking Army, And she goes, "Yeah, I don't care. You're not going back there, And so she called, and I saw her doctor and then I went, right? It was a weekend. So I saw the doctor on the Monday and I went back to Fort Dix. And I remember Drill Sergeant Johnson came up to me, and, with the big brim, drill sergeant hat, saying, "Your mother called." And I go, "Sorry, Drill Sergeant," but I could see he had like a little, like glee in his eye, and I was also on a drill team there. I did M1s.
Oh yeah, were you good at that?
With the silver hat and everything? Yeah, I was very good at that. I really led that platoon, and I got really good at that. I liked it, just throwing it. We did the Queen Anne salute, which is the hardest drill, and I liked it. I liked everything about it. It was everything I was looking for at the time, like to be acknowledged, to be, considered smart, So then, AIT wasn't as good, because first of all, we're in Georgia, and I went to a James Brown's concert in Augusta, Georgia. We were the only 2 white guys, me and my friend Lynn Bosmajian. We were the only 2 white guys in the theater. I mean, it was like, gunslinger, walking into that theater, people just like stop. But then I lit up a joint and everybody went, "Okay, these guys are cool," And, but
how did you like being? What was the MP training like? Was it just, were you bored with it, or did you?
It was a little boring. It was, it was like, how to write up forms, how to police people, like who wants to do that? I don't want to bug anybody, but it was, again, I took it as a challenge to conquer kind of, and I became good at it.
Yeah.
And then when we got orders not Lynn, Lynn never went to Nam. But when we got orders to go, I remember it was like 3 a.m. and I was doing a lot of KP because I got into trouble. But I remember Marvel waking me up and going, "I'm not going." And I looked and there was his girlfriend, and I never saw him again. It was the day after we got orders.
He bugged out.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I don't really remember. I remember going, I remember coming home once to tell my girlfriend and my friends that I was going to Nam, and my parents, but
What was their reaction?
They didn't want me to go, you know. They thought I shouldn't go. But I was like, yeah, well, I'm going because I'm not going AWOL, you know. And then I thought, well, it's going to be an adventure, you know. And
You weren't scared. You were just
I wasn't scared. I was never scared.
Yeah.
You know, I was never scared. I thought of it as an adventure, and I thought that I had already, like, you know, made things happen that, you know, I thought were, you know, just the whole idea of going into the Army was a good thing for me still.
Yeah.
You know, even though I was going to
Yeah.
you know, once I got there, it kind of changed, you know. I saw the undisciplined, you know, the chaoticness of it all. And, and I thought to myself, okay, I got to watch out for number one here. You know, that's it. I mean, I remember some cowboys like pulling up next to a Jeep and trying to rip my grandfather's watch off my wrist, you know, and, you know, I had to smack the guy, you know.
You're talking about in Vietnam.
Yeah. Now I'm in Da Nang.
So back up a little bit. You flew out of where? How did you get over there?
I don't know.
You don't remember?
How do they do that? I don't know. You know, I guess I flew out of whatever's closest to McGuire or something. You know.
What was that flight like? Do you remember it at all or no?
I remember it was Flying Tigers. You know, and we had to land in Anchorage, Alaska, because an engine fell off the plane. You know, I remember having 12 guys on top of me at one point, you know, like in the plane, because the whole plane went like this. And then we sat in Anchorage, Alaska, while they put an engine back on that same plane. And and we're all thinking to ourselves, wow, man, like, we are blessed, you know, like we just survived that, you know. And I remember Maggie May, some guy had an 8-track boombox, and he was playing Maggie May, you know, wake up, Maggie, I think. And we all were singing it as we're walking on the tarmac up to the, you know, up the steps of the plane. And I told Rod Stewart about that once. And he was freaked out that I was even talking to him. So Studio 54, you know, I made him jump, like, you know, but,
when you landed there, do you remember that experience walking off the plane?
Not really. You know, I mean, in my head, no, not really. I mean, you know, I'm sure I did it like every movie you see, you know, with the duffel bag and, you know, like rookies, you know, blouse boots and boom, 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 you know, walking. I have this kind of brain that doesn't, if I don't need to know it, I just kind of let it go.
Was it Da Nang? Where did you fly into?
I think I flew into either Cameron Bay, I think.
Okay.
And then we went to Da Nang. And then from Da Nang, I went up to Phu Bai. Right. And
describe that place.
Phu Bai, you know, yeah, there's nicknames for it, you know, that are, I just can't remember any of them right now, because I didn't give a shit. Again, I didn't give a shit, you know, about whatever thing was going on. I was watching out for me, you know, and, but, yeah, it was, my hooch happened to be right on a road, which I was like, oh, this is a nice hooch, you know, but I didn't realize that, you know, being next to the road and being in an MP compound was not a good thing, you know, because people, you know, like, were fragging us, you know, and the first time I got that was I got fragged, you know, like I heard the hand grenade hit the tin roof and start rolling, you know. I was like, that's a frag, you know, grab my mattress and hit the dirt. And,
how long had you been over when that happened? Had you been there?
Yeah, it was pretty good. I got also, well, in Cameron Bay, I got jumped.
Tell me that story.
Yeah. So I was coming out of an EM club and had been drinking, and we hadn't been assigned to a place yet, and I was coming out of the EM club and I looked up and I see a bunch of guys walking towards me, and it was like a wooden plank, walkway and a fence, and then an open field, and they start to pass me, and one guy throws an elbow into my chest. I go, "What the fuck, man?" And he goes, "What do you mean, what the fuck?" And they were all black guys, right? And I was like, "Oh man," and I grew up with a lot of friends, but also a lot of tension, I go, "Oh man, what the fuck?" And then from behind him came the punch, right? And I just did my best terrier. Right? I had a dog who was a toy fox terrier, and I kind of modeled myself after him, like just, and that's what I did. And I just started punching everything in sight and running, punching and running, and I got out of there, and then I went to the barracks, and we were having in country training at the time, like they were showing us all the drugs and stuff like that. It was funny. We robbed that guy. But
hold on, tell me that story.
The guy that showed us all the drugs, me and my friends cahooted how to rob his.
They were showing you local drugs. Is that what it was?
Yeah. Stay away from heroin, this, opium. Don't go near the mama sans. We're going, yeah. And me and my friends conspired to steal his briefcase, and we did. And but anyways, I went to the barracks, back to the barracks, and I hit the lights and say, "We got a problem, in this town, man. If we don't take care of it, we're going to be in trouble." And I had just been told about a guy that a Vietnamese guy that could bore out the center of your nightstick and put lead in there, and I had just gotten that. I had just gotten my nightstick back from that guy, right? So I said, we got to go take care of some business, right? And my friend Bob Fry had gotten beat up by the same guys. So we went out, about 10 of us went out, and we found those guys and we beat the shit out of them,
Did they quit doing that after that?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, we left shortly after that too. It was kind of like a mute thing, because we were out of there a couple of days later.
Wow. How long were you actually there at Cam Ranh Bay then?
Not long.
Very long.
Then up to Da Nang. And I think I took a C-130 up to Da Nang, and then we drove from Da Nang up to Phu Bai.
Was that a long drive, or was it?
I can't remember if it was a long. I think it was a long drive because you had to go through the High Van Mountains.
Were you in a bus, or
I was in a Jeep?
A Jeep,
yeah.
Just open air Jeep.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, with a 50. Yeah.
Oh my God.
And but we had V1.
Was it like a caravan of guys going?
Yeah, there was like a V100 as well. A couple of V100s, and but I was going to be a patrol MP, combat MP. They called us,
And what does that entail?
I was patrolling the city of Hue, which was just north of the base of Phu Bai.
And are you patrolling locals or just
patrolling?
Guys?
Yeah, military guys, but just looking for trouble.
Okay.
And we found it a couple of times. Like my first time on night patrol, you did 12-hour shifts, 12-hour, 6 at night to 6 in the morning, 6 in the morning till 6. So you always look forward to the daytime shifts,
right?
Because nothing really ever happened. Everything happened at night.
And would two of you go out? Who was on patrol?
Yeah, it'd be 3 of us usually. There'd be a Kwansan, I think they call him. I always get that word wrong. But it was the equivalent of an MP in the South Vietnamese army. right?
And that town up there, where that base, was it? What was up there? Was there air support?
The 101 Airborne, the 504 MPs, and there was an in-country airstrip.
Okay.
That I actually manned for 2 months because CID got robbed, and finance got robbed, and so CID wanted us to build a customs station even though it was only an in-country airport, right? They wanted to build a customs there. So me and this E7 built this customs, with the holding pen. We had a drug amnesty box, right? Like, drop all your drugs there and we won't question you, and tables to check people's bags, and as soon as we finished putting up the signs and building the tables and all that, he went home on emergency leave because his father died. And it was just me, So I didn't do anything, I mean, unless somebody's going to come up and tell me to do something, I'm not doing anything.
So you built all that stuff and then never...
Yeah. Me and my friends would like my friends would come up to my office in the customs building that we had. And I remember the Army had given us a poster with a photograph and a description of every drug known to man, and I had that on my wall. And at the end, when the last C-130 would go out, I would take that box, the drug amnesty box, into my office, and me and my friends would go through it and go, "Hey, this looks like a good one. Yeah, let's pop it," And that's what we did.
So your experience, drugs were just prevalent over there.
Oh yeah, I was a heroin addict the whole time I was there. Along with popping any drug I could, and drinking. Of course, you drank. I couldn't do anything without a beer or a Jack Daniels.
Yeah,
and yeah.
Were you at that point in the war? Were you guys getting hit with artillery ever at the base, or no?
Occasionally, not really, not much, because they knew we were pulling out too, 71, 72, Nixon started the stand down program, right? He was trying to get reelected. So he started the stand down program. I read in the Stars and Stripes, right, which is the Army newspaper.
Yeah.
That he told the rest of the world there were no more troops north of Da Nang. And here I was sitting 75 clicks north with 7,500 other guys. The whole 101 was up there, the 504, there was a MASH unit there. There was, there was all kinds of stuff up there, and he's telling the world that we're not there, like, really? Okay.
What'd that make you think when you read that?
I said, what a lying, similar to today's experience, like you can't trust anything these guys say.
Yeah.
I never could,
Well, okay, so
since they killed Kennedy,
Give me, what was a typical day of patrol? Give me some patrol stories.
Yeah, we just, I had a Jeep, MPs, and we would go, up to Fubai. I mean, we go from Fubai up to Wei, the city of Wei. I really liked the city of Wei. It was a beautiful city. It had the Perfume River and it'd been decimated. It's like that's where the Big Tet Offensive was, at the Citadel. So there was a lot of stuff going on, and you just like, I mean, I locked and loaded maybe 4 times the whole time I was here, because there was really nothing going on. And people would see us, they would go the other way, or they'd offer us drugs,
Really?
Yeah. And, it was like you saw an MP, just like, a felon here in, New York sees a cop, they, put their head down, they walk the other way, That was the same with us, I mean, at first, even, other soldiers, would see an MP and they would go, well, those guys, until they knew me or something, like if they knew me, then they knew I was cool, you know, you know, if you didn't know me, you would just think I was another pig, So,
was there recidive stuff, like guys that you were taking, that you dealt with all the time because they were always getting in trouble as an MP, or not really?
Not really. I mean, I had one guy that, didn't like me, jumped me from behind once. I threw him into a barbed wire pit, like we had these gullies, that you had barbed wire in them, and then, and that kind of stuff always took care of itself, like that guy bought one like a week later, and I was mad at him because he was raping chicks, I didn't like him. He was a good old boy from the South and he was raping chicks, defenseless, Vietnamese women, So I didn't like him. He didn't like me. He tried to beat me up once. He tried to jump me from behind once, and I threw him into a pit. And then later on, I guess a lot of people didn't like him, and somebody shot him.
Wow.
That was that. That took care of that.
Wow.
Right? I mean, I never really heard exactly what happened, but I just know he wasn't around anymore. And I had couple of things like that. The worst thing that happened to me there was I had a family of three, a grandfather, a 15-year-old girl, and a 10-year-old boy, right? That I was helping. They would take care of my hooch. They would take care of my laundry, my boots, everything. And I would give them cigarettes to sell on the black market, And one day I got an assignment to watch an Arvin that had its leg amputated, right? Like he was going somewhere, but they had to put an MP on him, right?
Like you're following him, or what? Was
No,
that?
he was in the mass
custody?
shooting. He
Okay.
was in the hospital,
Okay.
right? And they needed to have somebody guarding him because he was North Vietnamese regular, right?
Okay.
So, but he had his leg amputated, like he's not going anywhere, right? But but it was just protocol, right? And I go in there, it's a 12-hour shift, right? And I go in there, and right across from him is the 15-year-old girl. She had taken rat poison because she had been raped by that guy once already, and probably several other times, right? And so she was laying there naked, with tubes in her. They were trying to get the rat poison out of her. And at the end of the shift, she died. I had revised her about 8 times, and so that hurt. That one hurt, And I never did find out what happened to the grandfather or the 10-year-old boy, anything like that. Because, when someone tells you you're out of here, you're out of there, So they moved us down to, before my, it was a year tour. You were supposed to do a year, right? And when I was 8 months in country, they said, yeah, we're moving everybody down to Da Nang, right? So we did a caravan down to Da Nang. I don't think they closed Phu Bai. I think the 101 was still there. And 101 had their own MPs and all that too, But the 504 went down. And I ended up in 24 Corps, which was the camp that General Westmoreland lived in, and played racquetball.
So there was nothing going on.
Nothing going on anymore.
Wow.
I had to patrol the compound. And I remember the one thing that I had to make sure I did every couple of hours was throw a hand grenade into the river, right, by Westmoreland's boat, right? Because they wanted, in case it was sabotaged or something,
Oh my God.
Okay, and and that was it. And then the other thing that kind of happened to me there that pissed me off was, and then we would take, you had you had to like watch the gate, so there was somebody that had to watch the gate, right? So, but I was getting high with this guy, Jeff, and I kind of told him that I had this like pack going on with these two guys, this guy Kelly and this other guy Fry, the guy who got beaten up in Cameron Bay, right? That we would never bust anybody. And Fry ended up staying in Da Nang, right? And becoming like a cop, And when I ran into him, he told me, yeah, I busted people. So fuck that pack, And I said, well, I never have, because I went up north and it was kind of like, it was more of, more of combat, even though I didn't see any combat really. I like I said, I only locked and loaded about 4 times while I was there. But, and I did see, the enemy, but we never fired on each other.
Oh, tell me that.
Well, because we were in, the city of Wei, and like all hell would have broke loose if we fired on each other.
Right.
And we kind of knew it, and we kind of knew that the war was over.
So give me one of those stories. You see somebody?
The first time was I was just sitting in my Jeep, and I for some reason had moved up to the 50, which was mounted behind me. But I was usually the driver. I love driving. I still love driving. And the croissant was sitting in the passenger seat, and for some reason I had moved up to the 50. And it was just like, shooting the breeze or whatever,
You're just sitting in town? Is that where you're
outside,
okay.
South of the city.
Okay.
Right? On US 1.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, I see these guys walking across the road, about a quarter of a mile away,
How many guys?
Not even.
How many guys?
There were about 15 of them, like all with AKs, and all in black pajamas. This is my first sighting of the enemy, and it's just like out of the movies, like, Deer Hunter or something, I mean, it was, and I was like, fuck. And I locked and loaded, and they locked and loaded. You could hear the click,
Did they stop?
They stopped briefly, but kept on walking slowly, across the street, And I kept the 50 on them, and they never once did they point their rifles at me, but they had them down low, and I could hear them, lock and load. And yeah,
man, I bet your heart was racing.
That was my first experience, yeah. And I was just like, holy shit, this could be it, man, and but.
Was that at night? Was that at night, or
it was like at twilight? It hadn't really gotten that dark yet.
The other times you locked and loaded, what happened those?
Same kind of scenario. We would see each other. Either I was on a convoy, and we had stopped or something. Like you stop a lot in convoys. You don't like go like you see in the movies. Because people need to catch up and blah, 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 whatever. And we had stopped, and I think I was on a V then, V100, and that same thing. We had twin 60s on the Vs and 50s on each corner, and yeah, same thing. You saw them, they saw you. You lock and load, and first one to pull the trigger.
You think if it had been earlier in the war, something different would have came out of it?
I think so. I think so. I mean, one of our Vs was called Tricky Dicky, and it was a profile of Richard Nixon. And every time we would hear a lie, like that one, we would make his nose grow longer, like Pinocchio. And then we had the Woodstock and Catch 22 and the Good, the Bad, the Ugly, and the Texan. Those were the 5 Vs that we had.
Tell me the story. The story the night you went out on. Was it the first time you went out on patrol when they went?
Yeah.
Tell me that story.
Yeah. I mean, I was told to go out on patrol. I had the 6-6.
And this was this your first one or pretty close to it?
This was my very first one.
Okay.
To go drive up to Wei and patrol the city, And, my counterpart knew everything. I knew nothing. I was in country like 3 weeks, a month, maybe, and, yeah. So he would just tell me, go this way, go that way. It was a pretty straight run right into the city, on US 1. And, yeah. And we just, go up there and then just drive around. Or, he knew some people, and so he would get us food and stuff like that, And then we were sitting just south of the city when that first incident happened. I didn't report it. I didn't tell anybody.
Yeah.
I didn't tell anybody anything. Because nobody told me anything.
I've heard that's just so common that no one
Yeah.
knows what's going on.
Yeah, I never had anybody explain to me what to do, except for that one time that I built the customs things. They said, this is what you want me to do. CID told us, put a sign up here, put this there, put that there. That was it. But that was, I might as well have been a construction worker, as far as, and then, you had 12 hours on, 12 hours off, So we had the motor pool. That's where we kept a hookah with 16 spouts, and it was somebody's job to always keep that puppy going, so you could always go in and take a pull, and that was it. It was about getting high, keeping your head down. My birthday, I was on the north gate of Fubai, right? In a bunker, right? And I got so high that I didn't do anything, and then they come to relieve me, and there was a head on my gate, somebody put a fucking head on my gate, and I didn't even see it. I never heard it, never saw it. I could have been killed, but again, they didn't want to provoke. We didn't want to provoke them, and they didn't want to provoke us, is the way I felt.
Yeah.
Especially with, your fellow comrades, because I was considered the bad guy too, being an MP,
How did the locals treat you guys?
Happy, nice, I mean, sure, behind my back, they're like going, this guy, what a idiot. You look at him, he looks like a baby. Plus, I did look like a baby. I looked like I was 15 years old, even though I was 19,
Yeah.
And, so,
You feel like your drug use got worse the longer you were there?
it was pretty much staying on par, although I'd never done heroin before I went there. I didn't do heroin when I was back there. We didn't, I didn't, I wasn't, I was more, pills, acid, pot, and drinking.
Who introduced you to heroin over there?
The guys.
They were just doing it. It was just
Yeah, it was, I remember one time this guy Jeff told me how he had just made like 10 grand. I can't remember the number, but it was a lot of money because he sent some of it home.
Mm.
And he told me where the mama son was. And if I wanted to get in touch with her, she would just give it to me. Right. And I parked my Jeep outside the village, and I could see her coming out and looking out her door and looking for me, and I just couldn't do it. Because I knew enough that I didn't want to send this shit back home. This stuff was good, right? And I knew enough not to want to send it back home. And I remember Jeff telling me, "You idiot, come on." He had told me how to, like you buy a pair of speakers, at the PX, and you gut it, and you coat it with wax. He told me the whole scam, how to do it, and I have the speakers. They're here. I did buy the speakers, but I never gutted them and did the whole wax thing and put the heroin in. Same with the pot. I mean, we were getting pot from we were getting really good Thai weed, and we would send it to, we would send it to the guys in Germany, and they would send us hash, right? I mean, that hookah that we had in the motor pool room, the tool room, it was, the bowl was like that big, and we would have like Thai weed, hash, Thai weed, heroin, because I was into smoking the heroin. You didn't
shoot it
I
up.
didn't shoot it up. I have an aversion to needles, and I think that saved my life too, because I lost a brother-in-law that came down with AIDS.
So all that was transferring around via military transport.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And do you feel like the Army just turned a blind eye to it?
Oh yeah, definitely. Oh no, I mean, we knew that too. We knew that they were turning a blind eye to it. There were black EM clubs and white EM clubs. Yeah, I once got called in to. We got called in to a black EM club because apparently they had beaten the shit out of some white guys, and those white guys went to retaliate, and it was a big rumble, and so we were brought in to make like a semicircle in front of the club, and then send about 10 guys in the back door to flush them out. And then when they came out, we hit them with spotlights, and then just started arresting people. But my partner had gotten hit with a bottle. And so like a little melee happened,
like a little riot that happened.
Yeah, to squash these guys, and of course I have my club, and I got brought up on charges of excessive use, but they were dropped. Yeah.
So there was a lot of racial tension.
A lot of racial tension. I think they did that on purpose. I mean,
what do you mean?
To keep us fighting mad, because there was a lot of downtime, there's a lot of nothing happening, and they needed to keep you mad, like they need to keep you,
interesting,
fighting mad. I think in my book, I never, got any kind of confirmation about that, or, anything like that, but that's what I think they did.
Yeah. The food, what was the food like over there?
I'm not a food person because, the food in my house is always kind of bland anyways, because my mother wasn't a food person either.
Yeah.
We used to call my mother Horizontal Mary because she was always laying on the couch going, "Why do you think I had 6 kids? Somebody do the dishes," smoking a cigarette, reading a book, and having a little hopperscap, a little drink.
So the food wasn't bad. It was just...
Yeah, I never thought about it. I mean, it was something that kept you going,
What's the funniest thing that happened over there for you?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think I was about to tell this story, but never did, about when I was getting high with my friend Jeff, and I was in Da Nang now. And
this is later?
Yeah, this is late. This is towards the end when they moved us down to Da Nang.
Okay.
I had to. So I was getting high with Jeff, and I was still pretty heavy on my heroin, and we were both doing it, listening to music reel to reel, And I told him about how I had this pact with Bob Fry and Kelly about not busting anybody, and then I just found out that I was the only one who kept the pack, because Kelly never made it over, right? He dropped a garbage can on his foot full of water, right? Like we were going bivouacking, and he looked at me and he goes, "I'm not going," and let go of the handle, and it broke his foot. I didn't see him until after we got back, until years later after I got back from Nam, But anyways, so I told Jeff that, right? And then he proceeds to tell me how he's going to re-up, and make the Army his life. I was like, what? Are you fucking crazy? You know, I mean, let's get out of here, you know? And so that was that. Then the next day, I'm like, working the gate at 24 Core. And I had let this deuce and a quarter come in to use the PX. And there were like 4 black guys on the back of it, you know, just came off of Monkey Mountain.
Yep.
And so I had let them in earlier, and I don't know what they were doing. I didn't care. And I was like, you know, doing my heroin. I had my gun belt off. I had my hat, you know, pushed back. I was just like cruising. And all of a sudden I see Jeff and this officer walking towards me. I go, what the fuck? So I straighten myself up. And just at that time, the deuce and a quarter is going back out with those 4 guys on it. And the lieutenant says, I want you to stop that deuce and a quarter. I go, all right, fuck, you know, stop it. He goes, come on down, boys. You know, he's like, you know, acting real tough. And he goes, I want you to apprehend these guys for dereliction of, for uniform violation. I go, what? And I look at Jeff, you know, and I go, you want me to what? And he goes, yeah, look at it. Boots aren't bloused. There's no rank on his collar. You know, I want you to apprehend him. They never said arrest, right? In the military, it's apprehend. So I looked at Jeff and I looked at the lieutenant, who I didn't even know. Apparently, he was my commander, you know, but I didn't know him. And I go, sir, you want to have him arrested, apprehended, you're going to have to do it yourself. And I walked away. So I got brought up on dereliction of duty, disobeying a direct order, and deserting my post. Which, if they had ever declared Vietnam a war, I could have been shot for. But they never declared Vietnam a war. They always made it police action, right? So anyways, I got busted.
So what was the punishment?
Well, I got you, and this is I'm leading up to my best time in Nam. So I got busted down to private first class. Right, that was an E4, right, and I was confined to barracks, right, to the best barracks in all of Vietnam, fucking 24 Corps. You know, we had racquetball, we had basketballs, we even had a soccer, baseball field, you know, diamond, and you know, it was like a great place to be. You know, spend my last 2 weeks, and I started.
Oh, you only had 2 weeks left?
I didn't know that at the time, but I did. You know, and I started playing a lot of racquetball, and I got to be friends with this lieutenant who was really good at it, and I was really good at it. And so he goes, let's do tournaments, you know? So we started like going all over fucking Da Nang doing these tournaments with this lieutenant. So even though I was supposed to be confined, he superseded that by, you know, like, yeah, he's my racquetball partner, you know? And I think it was paddleball. It wasn't racket. It was paddleball.
Yeah.
And and I got a big shiner once, you know. But yeah, you know, so that was my fun time, you know, and I got off the heroin, you know, because I knew that if I didn't, I was going to go to either Long Ben or Cam Bay to detox.
So they would test you? Was that before they sent you home?
Everyone had to do a piss test before you got sent home. And I knew that, you know, a lot of grunts didn't know that. And so they would get caught, you know, but I knew because I was one of the people that would enforce it.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So, so me and this guy, Junior Lopez, had made a pact that we would watch each other. And to this day, I don't know who went first, me or Junior, you know, but I remember tying him down to a bunk and making sure that he didn't, you know, like swallow his tongue or choke on his own puke, you know, and he did the same for me. And I withdrew. I detoxed from heroin and didn't get caught in the piss test and went home, you know. Yeah. Junior's best friend back in the States was Carlos Santana. And one time we got a reel from Carlos, and it says, this is early 1972, right? And like April or something. And he said, and it was a concert, and he goes, and it was the start of Black Magic Woman. And he goes, "This is for you, Junior, and you too, Paul." we played that back and forth on that reel like 1,000 times, But that my reel never made it back. Somehow it got lost in the mail.
Did you listen to a lot of music over there?
Yeah.
What were you into?
Moody Blues. The big album out just when I got drafted was Carole King, "You're So Far Away," but yeah, I like Moody Blues, Jefferson Airplane.
Cassettes?
Reel to reels.
Wow.
Reel to reels, but cassettes also 8 tracks.
Yeah.
But I had a reel to reel. And people would make reels for you and send them to you.
Were you getting letters from your girlfriend the whole time?
Yeah.
What happened there?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I got a Dear John. But yeah, I would write Jackie every day, and sometimes my parents and things like that. But yeah, I would write her like every day. I was really in love with her. I was a real Don Juan, throughout high school and everything, because I was a child actor and model and stuff like that. But but when I met Jackie, I fell in love, and that was it, And so yeah, so I'd write her every day. And then when I was in Da Nang at 24 Core was when I got the letter, the Dear John.
Oh, wow.
And she didn't know I was coming home because I had 4 more months to go, right? And so I called her. So anyway, but a friend of mine had just killed himself over a Dear John.
Out in Vietnam? In
Vietnam. He was General Westmoreland's driver, right? He drove a Ford, an air-conditioned Ford LTD.
Oh, my gosh.
And drove Westmoreland around, And here he was, got this Dear John and fucking killed himself, right? So so that happened, and then mine happened. And I was like, yeah, I'm not killing myself over this person, I was devastated. I cried myself to sleep every night, of course, into the pillow.
Yeah.
Show anybody that kind of emotion. And so yeah. So then when I got home, like I said, nobody knew I was coming home, and landed at JFK. I had to wear, first of all, when I got to Oakland, right? I walked into this airplane hangar, right, to fill out my DROS papers. And who was up on the stage but Tommy Walsh, one of the guys that I got drafted with.
Wow.
And I was like, fucking Walsh, So, this is before computers, really, right? So he went through my papers, and he got rid of that bust, right? And he gave me $1,500 right then and there, right? And reinstated me to an E4, a Spec 4, because I was in the MPs, so it's Spec, right? Reinstated me to a Spec 4, and then gave me a voucher for another $1,500 for when I got back to New York.
Oh, my gosh.
And I was out of the Army in 3 days, like everybody else was taking weeks. But Walsh knew how to do it, so Walsh did it for me, and the only thing was and then he gave me a voucher for a Pan Am flight from Oakland to New York.
Your family still doesn't know you're home.
No, I called Jackie from Oakland, and she was in trouble with her mother's boyfriend. Like her father left the year that I came into the family. Her father left, right? So there was her mother started dating this gardener, right, who was a real sleazebag, but and he had while I was on the phone with her, he started yelling at her. And like telling her, like, get off the phone, you've been on the phone for hours or so. And which she had been because she had missed school. She told me all this later. She had missed school from FIT and was trying to get notes. She graduated summa cum laude from FIT. She was like the smartest kid in the class.
Yeah.
And so anyways, she'd been on the phone with her girlfriend trying to get notes from that day's class that she had missed, right? And he was pissed because he needed to use the phone. And so, she had just hung up, and now another phone call came in, and it was for her again, and it was me. And I didn't really even get a chance to tell her that I was in Oakland. She thought, because you could make phone calls from Nam, but you had to say over and shit like that, And
so she didn't know you were coming home.
She didn't know I was home either. She didn't know I was in the States. And because Ricky ripped the phone out of her hand while I was on the phone with her. I wanted to fucking kill this guy, right? And so anyways, like I got you had to wear your full dress screens to get the free flight, from Oakland to New York. And I did that. I landed at Kennedy Airport like 8:00 in the morning on a Sunday morning. And a kid who looked pretty much just like me, like a year earlier, like with the hair and the tie-dye jeans, said something to me. And to this day, I don't know what he said, but he said something to me, and then he spit at me.
In the airport?
In the airport, in Kennedy Airport. I grabbed him by the ponytail. I fucking punched him in the face. I knocked him out. Stepped over him, went into the bathroom, took off my dress screens. I kept my ribbons, but I took off my dress screens and threw them in the garbage and hitchhiked home. That was my welcome home, And luckily, I didn't live that far. I lived about 10 miles away, from Kennedy. Yeah. And I went right to Jackie's house, right? And I called Ricky out. And on my way out the door, I grabbed the baseball bat I saw when I walked in to the house. It was sitting right there. And as soon as he walked out the door, I hit him with the bat. And that was my welcome home.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
What did Jackie do when she saw you?
She was, jumped in my arms and blah, 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 But she was going out with this guy, right? He was a scumbag. He was my oldest brother, the guy I went to Nam to. He was his friend, and he was known as a backstabber, going after guys, girls, and like she had never, I was her first boyfriend, her first, like sexual encounter, so I couldn't blame her really, to see what it was like with somebody else, and then, we spent 4 days in a hotel in Island Park, Long Island, just like, yeah.
What did your parents think about you coming home? Were they happy?
Yeah, I think so. I don't remember.
It's all a blur.
Yeah, it's all a blur, really, and, yeah, I just remember like my mother felt bad for me that she, let my education lapse. Like nobody ever talked to me about college or anything like that. I was a dumb kid who always got into trouble, who stuttered, who's dyslexic, didn't know what dyslexia was at the time, but, stuttered and couldn't read.
Yeah.
Right. And, but, I could help the family out with modeling and, and stuff like that, So, it was a little bit of a cash cow, but nobody really thought of doing anything for me. My brother, my older brother, who joined the National Guard, he was a genius. He did the computer systems for pays the city workers, And, so he was a genius. So he was always talked about, being, going to college and stuff
Right.
like that, but not me, like I was an athlete and possibly, but I was also, like I started drinking when I was 6 years old and I didn't really stop until I was 36, So, nobody ever talked to me about anything, but my mother felt bad and so she got me a tutor. And that's when I found out I was dyslexic. Like I remember going to see this guy in Freeport, Long Island, and we went up to his attic, and he gave me 4 booklets, like kind of like kids' books, and said, "Read these 4 and write what you got out of each one of them." And so I did, and it took me about an hour, and then he went through them, and he goes, "Well, you have good comprehension. You know exactly what you've read. The problem is that you're dyslexic." And I go, "What is that?"
What year was that?
72.
Wow, I didn't even know they were throwing that term around back then. Wow.
Yeah. And then as I studied with him longer, he said, "Yeah, your dyslexia is unique. Actually, it's audio. Like you see the word, right? You know what the word means, right?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "You can't say it so well, probably because of your stuttering." And I go, "Yeah, that's right. I mean, I would have the hardest time saying spaghetti, you know." And to this day, my wife mocks me every once in a while, more because of my accent, like she go, "Door? Really? Door?" And I go, "Yeah, what's the matter with that?" But because my wife, like, even though my wife's from Holland, she kind of had her formidable years in Ohio, where they have absolutely no accent.
Right.
In Ohio, So, anyway, she kind of, and she also makes fun of me with my spelling. Like I'll sit there, and like trying to type something. I go, "How do you spell cat again?" And she'll go, "CAT, cat. Come on." I go, "What do you think? I like this?"
So when you got home, drug use still was going on?
Oh yeah,
Alcohol?
yeah. Big
Worse
time.
or better?
Probably about the same level.
Okay.
Except yeah, I mean, I wanted to get out of town, So the Dear John that I got from my wife was she was going to Europe without me. Like she was supposed to wait for me to get back from Nam and then we were going to go, but she was going to go without me. And by the way, I got this boyfriend, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, "Motherfucker, I'll show you, Before I left, I was a fighter, but now coming home, I'm not a fighter anymore. I don't care. There was shit that happened. And I don't care anymore, And so everybody thought I was going to kill George, which I easily could have, but I didn't want him, So I just went out and got another girlfriend. And then Jackie left for Europe, with my sister. And so I was like, I sat around for another week, and then I was like, "What am I doing here?" Like I'm getting called baby killer, somebody's always trying to provoke me.
Would you tell anybody you served in Vietnam?
Yeah, they all knew I did because
they all
it's the
did.
town.
And you were just getting stuff for that.
Yeah. So I bought a one-way ticket to Rome. And I remember my father met me at the airport. And my girlfriend, the screamer, drove me there. And my father was like, I was telling her that I was still in love with Jackie, right? This girl, Marianne. And, but she was like, when I was at the airport, she was like grabbing onto my leg and shit, I had to have my father pull her off of me. And then I went to Europe and I had a great time. I was traveling by myself, I wasn't doing that much drinking or drugging, it was kind of felt nice, because, I was doing things, constantly, getting on a bus or a train, and even boats. I took a boat from Brindisi to Greece, and yeah, so I was having a great time. And then I met up with a bunch of guys from Queens who were Greek, and they had a lot of good drugs, and they liked me that I was a Vietnam vet and all that. So they just shared with me, and they took care of everything. One of the guys, or was it two of the guys, their uncle was one of the generals on the coup, the Greek coup. And so that was that. So I went to Europe and had a good time.
You end up with Jackie?
Yes. So, this is 1972, or could have been 70. No, it was 72. I got home, I think, in April of 72. So this was the summer of 72. And, I called her mother from Athens. This is after traveling around Europe and all that. And I said, where is she? And of course, 72, she was shocked to even get a phone call from me. But,
yeah.
But she said she's in Amsterdam, and her and your sister are getting ready to come home in a couple of days. So she said, okay. She told me where she was. This place called Vinkenveen outside of Amsterdam. It's like the Beverly Hills of Amsterdam. And Jackie's mother had been a singer, and she was staying with friends of her mother's who were like the Burt Bacharach of Europe, songwriters. And so, anyways, I booked a one-way flight from Athens to Amsterdam. Yeah, this is a little comical, but I got to Amsterdam and so let's see if we can buy some drugs here. Isn't this supposed to be the drug capital of the world? So this black guy came up to me. He goes, "Hey, you want to buy some drugs?" Like a guy from Brooklyn who used to, was in the army too.
Yeah.
And so just as I was buying it from him, a van load of cops went by, and I just did the transaction really quickly and didn't check it out, right? And then I get to Vinkenveen, and I hitchhiked there, right? And I get to Vinkenveen, and I walked around the side of the house to the back door, rang the doorbell, and my sister answered. She says, Paul Colliton, what are you doing here, And then Jackie came out, and, we hugged and we kissed, and I say, hey, you want to do some good hash? And we went to this gazebo to do the hash, and she looks at it, she goes, let me see that, and she opens it up even more and takes a bite out of it. I go, what are you doing? She goes, this is Druppies. This is a salted licorice candy. I was like, God damn it, So the next day I went back to Amsterdam, and I saw a kid with a American flag backpack, and I said, hey, kid, you want to buy some hash? I sold it for the exact same amount, minus the bite, But so and then we took a train down to the tip of Italy, and then went to Mallorca and Ibiza. Had a really good time. Then we hitchhiked back because that $1,500 check, my sister was supposed to send it to me. Everybody did everything through American Express.
Yeah.
Back in the 70s, if you were traveling around Europe.
Yeah.
And it never came because she put like a really bad address on it.
Oh, no.
Somebody finally opened it up, saw my name, looked me up, looked up my address, and sent it to me. And I got it like 3 months later.
Wow.
The $1,500. But we had a hitchhike, Jackie and I, to get back to Holland. And we had a great time. I mean, one time we got picked up by we slept on the side of a road, what we thought was a field, and it turned out to be a graveyard.
Oh, no.
And these guys who were touring in these sports cars saw us and made a circle around us to protect us. We never even heard them. I'd never heard them pull up, either did Jackie. And then they gave us a ride all the way to to Cannes, and then we hitchhiked from Cannes up, and we got picked up by motorcyclists, and cafe bikes, and that was great. Pulled into Paris on cafe bikes. That was a lot of fun. And then and we came back to the States, and Jackie wanted to, she had just graduated from FIT, and she wanted to be an interior designer to the stars. So we moved to LA, and we both hated LA, and ended up driving back from Los Angeles, and I showed these drugstore prints, because I was taking pictures with this little Yashica GSL rangefinder, and I showed them at SVA, and I got accepted. With also the GI Bill.
Yeah, explain SVA to people.
SVA is School of Visual Arts. So I didn't know I thought I wanted to be a cameraman. For and I actually did do that. My first year out of School of Visual Arts, I worked for one of my professors and became a cameraman. But the company that had hired him ripped him off and basically ripped me off too. If they were ripping him off, they ripped off everybody that he had hired.
Yeah.
Right? So I got hired by him, and he got hired by this company that ripped us all off. And so now I couldn't, I didn't have a reel to show anyone, to try to get another job, because I didn't get anything out of it, and so I became a color printer because I liked that, and I had to pay the rent, right? So I became a color printer, and then that led me. I was doing this portfolio for this guy named Klaus Luca, who was a big time advertising photographer. He did Volkswagen. He did the Marlboro Man and stuff like that. He was a commercial photographer. And so I was doing, and he was very prolific in advertising himself, and promoting himself. So I was doing these little booklets for him. And the lab that I was working at moved just like a half a block away. But in that move, the rollers got contaminated in the processor, and most of this guy's clients couldn't give a shit. They were like advertising agencies, and they were just using these prints to promote, to sell their ideas to their clients. But Klaus Luca, German, very, nice guy. We're still friends today. He approached me, and he goes, "What's going on here? These are a little muddy." I go, "Yeah, I know the roll is bad." And he spent all the money in the move, and he doesn't have the money to replace the rollers. So he goes, "Okay, what if I build you your own lab? Will you come work for me? And I'll double your salary." And I said, "Okay," so no brainer really. And so I left Box One and went to work for Klaus, and it went from just being the printer to the third assistant to the second assistant to the first assistant, and that kind of led me into the world of photography, and I liked it, and then I went to work for other photographers. That's what you did, as you became assistants, and I kind of got a reputation, as being a good assistant. And one day, Annie Leibovitz, her studio manager called me. So Annie is looking for a good assistant. How would you like to work for her? And I said, sure, And my first job was with, she was shooting Rodney Dangerfield for what was it? Easy Money. That, where he's a baby photographer. And my job on the set was to get the baby from the mother and hand him to Rodney. And that was my whole job, right? in this photo shoot. And at one point, Annie goes, "Let's take the diaper off. I don't know if we'll use it, but let's take the diaper off, and you can hold the kid, with its butt towards us, And so Rodney agrees to that, and so the mother does it, and I hand the kid to Rodney, and I swear to God, just as she said, "Okay, that's it," the kid peed all over Rodney. I'm the only one who really sees this because I'm right next to him on the set, just out of the picture's frame. And, and then the mother comes up with a Polaroid and says, "Oh, Mr. Dangerfield, could you please sign this Polaroid for me?" And he looks at me and goes, "I'll tell you. First her kid pees all over me, and now she wants me to sign her Polaroid. I get no respect, And I said, "Well, can you sign mine too?" And he did. I have it. But so that was my first job with Annie, and then I ended up, working with her. It was just me and her for like a year.
Oh, that's cool. Was that fun?
Yeah, it was fun. It was a lot of drugs, again, except now it's cocaine instead of heroin, And I had a good friend, Anna Cali, whose brothers were the Cali cartel, And so Anna had a thing for me. And so like sometimes I would spend like 3 or 4 days in Jan Warner's, apartment on 57th Street overlooking Carnegie Hall. And but
what made you quit all that?
What made me quit it all?
Mm-hmm.
God. Intervention. I don't know. Divine intervention. I have no idea.
Was there one thing that happened that?
No, not really. Well, I was going to jump off a balcony.
How old were you?
36. So when I was 30, Jackie and I conceived a child, and her mother had an apartment in Tribeca, and my apartment was on 29th and 2nd, right? It was a 1-bedroom with a horse bath, right? The bathtub was in the kitchen. And so her mother said, "Take my apartment." It was a 2-bedroom apartment. You can't live in that place with a child. And she was right. And so we moved to Tribeca. Now, Jackie, being an interior designer, all her vendors are up off of 3rd Avenue. That's like the big, where all the fabric and furniture and all that, lamps and all that. So she would have to go now from Tribeca to up by Bloomingdale's every day, and she was working for a guy up there too, I think. Yeah. And so there was an outbreak of rubella in secretaries in Wall Street. People, Jackie used to walk to work from where we lived on 29th. Now she had to take the subway and interact with these people, right? And sure enough, when she was like 7 months pregnant, she was diagnosed with rubella. And they had doctors come in from all over the world to look at her because it was the first case in 15 years, I think they said, that someone was pregnant with rubella. And basically they said that the child would be born deaf, dumb, and, and blind. And so they induced labor. And yeah, it was really rough on us. And more on Jackie, I'm sure, but I took it really hard. And, they called the cops on me. I had to be restrained. And the cops just let me go, though. They just drove me around until I sobered up, and then they let me go. And then we had to live like that, down there. And I was actually doing pretty good. My career was going pretty well. I was shooting a lot of things. I had some very notable, like covers and stuff like that. And then one day I was supposed to do the head of Philip Morris, the
Tobacco.
no, the other one, the talent agent.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Or was it? It could have been the
Philip. This is Philip Morris's tobacco.
Yeah. And then Anyways, I remember it was a great shot of this guy smoking a cigarette with the smoke going up and everything, and everyone kept on asking me if I was okay. First of all,
you mean when you were taking that photo?
Yeah. First of all, when my assistant showed up, who was a friend of mine, right? I had like 6 lines of blow laid out on my counter, and he was like, "What are you doing? It's fucking 8:00 in the morning." So listen, you don't want to do them? Okay, fine, and I just did them all, and at that point I was doing things like throwing the coke away and then looking to see where it landed, like all kinds of like drug addict kind of attitude, creeping into the kitchen to undo the bottle of vodka so I could take it, and then like painstakingly screwing it back on, just like, laying. And then one day I was like laying in bed, the alarm went off. Me and Jackie get up, right? I'm pretending like I'm going to go to work, and she does go to work. And then I climbed back into bed as soon as she's out the door, and I woke up at like 2 p.m, and I was like, what the hell am I doing? I might as well just end this, And so I went and I sat on my balcony. It was about like a 1.5 foot wide cinder block wall, right? And I sat on there with my legs over the wall.
How many stories up are you?
31 stories. And I sat there, and the first thing that came to my head was my mother's voice. My mother was an ambulance chaser, because we lived in a town that was a volunteer fire department. So my mother had the code, for when they would set off the alarms, and she go, "Ooh, no." I remember one time she said, "Oh, that's Hempstead Avenue in Merrick." Like this could be a good one, and it was just me and her. So we got into the car and we went, and it was a jumper, and I remember my mother telling me that most jumpers die of a heart attack, right? Which some friends of mine who are doctors say that's not necessarily true. And 9/11, I saw maybe 100 jumpers, from that same balcony, and some of them would flail and then go limp, but others would hold it. I remember this one guy held a Johnny Weissmuller the whole way until I lost him into the other buildings, But so anyways, I thought about that. I thought, you know what? This doesn't scare me, And then the next thing, and meanwhile, all I needed to do was straighten up my body because I was on the tail of my butt, And then the next thought that came into my head was vanity. I thought to myself, you know what I'm going to look like? And I guess that was enough, And I swung my legs over, and I went and sat on my couch, and I started crying. And it was like I had an out-of-body experience where I was like seeing myself crying and going, what the hell? Maybe you need some help, It's like, help? What's wrong with me, And then I remembered that my sister something had happened to my sister where all of a sudden she changed her life around. I didn't know that it was alcohol. I didn't know that it was, AA or any of that. But I just knew that I was crazy. That's what I thought. I was crazy, and I'm going to end up on the fucking Bowery unless I do something about myself, So I got on my bicycle that had no brakes, had spiked for like 5 years. It wasn't like a free-form bicycle, just didn't have brakes. I put my foot in the fork if I needed to really brake, or I just hit something. And in this case, I hit her Haagen-Dazs stand. She had a stand on the corner of Wall and Broad by the New York Stock Exchange. Gorgeous blonde, right? And guys trying. I remember Wall's like a hill, and I remember coming down the hill, seeing her, and she's like either fending off guys or trying to sell them ice cream, and I crashed right into it, and she said, "I've been waiting for you," And she said, "Now go home and call Dad." My father had been a drug and alcohol counselor out in Long Island for like 5 years or something. I didn't even know, because that's how out of whack I was. Again, I had gotten to that point, But last time I was so out of whack, I ended up going into the Army, And then I thought the Army, like I survived Vietnam, I survived heroin, I got myself off of heroin, like all that stuff, like, so I could do anything, right? But here I was again, lost, ready to kill myself for what, And so, so I did go home and I called my father, and my father did what you're supposed to do. He said, "I love you. You're going to be okay. Now hang up the phone. Somebody will call you back." Right. And in those 2 minutes before that guy called me back, I was already going to myself, "Oh, am I really that bad? Come on. All right. I didn't jump, did I?" And luckily, though, the phone rang, and it was this guy with this Irish brogue, and he introduced himself as Mike O'Neill. My favorite person in the world is my grandfather, who was Mike O'Neill. I started crying again, and he goes, "Pack a bag, head out to your father. He's going to take you here, And I did that, and I ended up in this place called Plainview Rehab out in Plainview, Long Island. I was there for 10 weeks. 70 days. And I came back from there, back to New York, and went right to an AA meeting. And I've been going ever since.
Wow.
That was 39 years ago. My wife was like, "You got to get a real job, So I became a UPS driver for 6 months. I was 36 years old. I was fucking driving the 2200, the biggest UPS truck in the city, doing the heaviest route. I did the Times Square. I did the rug route. I did, the garment district. I did the music route, like Sam Ash and, and all those places. It was 46th Street there were all these music stores, right? So I was delivering amps and guitars, and then I was picking up big bales of fabric, and then I was delivering jewelry to, the diamond. It sucked. I was like doing it from 6 a.m. till like 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and then one day I was telling my sponsor about, I can't take this anymore, man. This is like killing me. And he said, "Well, I just got this job. Maybe you can come work for me." So I became a bodyguard, right? When I went to tell UPS that I was quitting, they said, "No, we were going to make you a manager. That's why we gave you the rough job,
How old are you at this point?
36. Right? I've been drinking and drugging for 30 years. I started drinking when I was 6. And so anyways, so I was 36. Now I'm like 37 and I'm about to, and so John, my friend, my sponsor in AA, had a bodyguard business. So I became a bodyguard to Sir Rudolph Bing, the head of Lincoln Center, who had Alzheimer's. And I did that. And then one day I was doing that, and a client of mine called me from the photo business. And he didn't know that I had left the business, right? And he said, listen, I got this big bench in the hedges job. I think you'd be great for it. And I went to my friend John. I said, listen, can you give me 3 days off? This job came up. He says, yeah, man, go for it. So I did that. I made like 10 grand or something, and then another friend of mine called me. Goes, listen, I'm building this big studio. It's going to be the biggest studio in New York City, and we need somebody who knows everybody and knows what needs to be done to make it the best studio in New York, right? And he goes, how would you like to do it? And we'll give you like 2% once it's up and running and stuff like that. And so I quit John, and it was and it was like serendipitous, anyways, because that was ending, right? The situation that was all about was coming to an end, right? So I built Industrial Super Studio here in New York, and the funny thing about that was, so at one point, not 60 Minutes, but the other one, 2020. Yeah. Came to interview Sir Rudolph Bing. So he had a crazy wife, right? And she was basically a homeless person that, because of his Alzheimer's, she tricked him into marrying. And so basically what was happening was they would like kind of like letting the money go, until, and then have the marriage annulled. Right? Like everybody was making money, right? He didn't have any family, no nephews, nieces, anybody to leave his money to. So they kind of felt justified. And it wasn't hurting anybody. And it was all legal. And so, but she got 20 minutes, 2020 to come and do this interview, right? And so, I was kind of like, I had a Fu Manchu and I had a London fog jacket, raincoat. And John said, oh, you make sure that they don't talk to Sir Rudolph Bing because he's got Alzheimer's, right? So every time they tried to talk to him, I would step in front of the camera and go, well, we're not talking to Sir Rudolph at this time, and I would do shit like that, right? So, so now here I am, and at the very end, they go, we tried to talk to Sir Rudolph, but under the watchful eye of his bodyguard, and they pan out, and there I am standing there like that, So it's kind of funny. But anyways, now I'm finished building Industria Super Studio, which is on Washington and Little Jane, in the West Village. They all of a sudden, my boss tells me, listen, 2020 wants to do a story on Industria, so we don't want to subject, our clients to, so why don't you fake a fashion shoot, And so now here I am, clean cut with all black, because, photographers wear black. And, and the same crew walks in. I go, look at this, they didn't see me, they didn't get me at first because I looked different, But then once they like said, okay, Mr. Colliton, could you stand like right there, And I was like, yeah, sure. And then the cameraman goes, where do I know you from? So Rudolph Bing, I was his bodyguard. So that was kind of funny. And then, I just started getting into it. They kind of screwed me, but I didn't really care, because I wanted to get out on my own anyways, So that's what I did. And then, this magazine contacted me, and they weren't happy with their photographer, and they gave me one job to do. They liked it. They gave me another. They liked it, and then then they made it. They gave me a contract, And I could see that, even though the money wasn't that great with the magazine, the contacts were great.
Yeah.
So, and that's what happened, started doing that.
Relay the, because I want to tie it back to Vietnam, but relay the story with Muhammad Ali.
Oh, yeah. So that was somebody else. That wasn't the magazine, but that was the Parkinson's Association. And they had seen my work, and they, and that's kind of what I love to do. I love to work with people. I love to, build an environment around them to do a portrait. Although this one was not going to be that way, but they asked me if I could do a portrait of Muhammad Ali because he was being honored with the Parkinson's Association. He died of Parkinson's. But this is when he was still pretty lucid, he was still joking around with people. And so it was up at the Pierre Hotel. I had a backdrop made because I wanted to have the backdrop. And I have a great friend Joe Ginsberg, who makes all my backdrops. And he's a real good faux finisher, Excuse me. So he made me a backdrop. I said, make it so it looks like it's lit. Right. So he made me a backdrop. I had it in the area where they were going to have the cocktail party. And Ali was supposed to come early before the cocktail party, but he didn't, He came as the cocktail party was in full-fledged, So, but, I had the light and the backdrop set up. Excuse me. So, I did the, maybe I think I got 2 rolls off of 12 frames each Hasselblad, right? And then he went to be honored as the for the Parkinson's Association, and I went up to the penthouse suite, or the presidential suite, I think it was. Excuse me. And then after Ali was honored, people who donated a lot of money were brought up there, and he would do the rope-a-dope with them.
Right.
And I would take their picture. And at one point, the woman who ran the association, her daughter, Julie, said, "Hey, listen, you guys have been magnanimous," which he was. I was just doing my job, but we're going to give you like 20 minutes, have something to eat. There was a big buffet. And so we did. We sat down, and now we're on the couch with our plates on our lap and eating. And I'm sitting next to him. And I really hadn't gotten a chance to say hello to him even. Really, that's how boom, boom, boom it was. So anyways, I said he had a case, an old Samsonite case with a handle. And I offered to help him with it once, my assistant did. My assistant stayed downstairs to break down the equipment and to get it back to the studio because I was just doing strobe on camera. And so anyways, I said, "What's in the case?" And he got all like, "Ooh." and he brought it over and he opened it up, and it was full of brochures on Islam. And so he turned to me and he said, "Allah, God saved my life," And so I said to him, "Yeah, me too." And he goes, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, he pointed to my case and he goes, "Vietnam," because I had a Pelican case with decals on it, and one of them said Vietnam veteran. I said, "Well, there too, plus I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict, and I've been sober for like 10 years, And so he got very emotional, and he pulled me into his shoulder, and we both started crying. And I was like, "Wow, this guy is amazing," And then he once we broke, he was like, "Are you mad at me?" I said, "No, why?" And he goes, "'Cause I didn't go." And I go, "No, man." I said, "You had everything to live for. You stood up for your principles." I said, "Man, I was proud of you, We were all proud of you, And he got like very happy and so, because, they stripped him of his title for 5 years, in his prime of his boxing career. And so anyways, And then, as I said, like I could park anywhere at that time because I had this friend who was a captain in the fire department, and he gave me plaques for my car, and so I was parked right out in front of the Pierre, and I was putting my equipment in. And all of a sudden, he came up from behind me and he did this thing to my ear, and I was like, "Jesus, champ!"
Muhammad
Ali did, and I go, "Jesus, champ, what the hell?" And then I see Ed Bradley, from 60 Minutes, like laughing. They were like best friends, and he said, he goes, "Oh, he likes you," and we became friends. There's a picture of him on my desk, of me and him on on my desk. He was a nice guy, and I mean, the war did a lot. I mean, I was saying to you that I had these kids here yesterday shooting my friend Patrick, who you're going to do a story with, and they were telling me and Patrick how they, they're Gen Z and they've been living with technology and war, is what he said. And I was like, "What do you mean war?" And we were too. As we were kids, I mean, growing up with the Vietnam War, except we were watching it live on TV,
So looking back now, I'm struck with the question. You know how you said when you went to boot camp, you kind of found yourself in a way, in that structure, And then I wonder, I know MP wasn't like your first choice, right? Kept you out of the field.
Mm-hmm.
But did you feel the same satisfaction in Vietnam that you did in boot camp? You know what I mean? Looking back?
No, I couldn't wait to get out of there. I couldn't wait to get out of Nam. I mean, I didn't think about it. I pushed it out of my head, which I'm really good at doing, is pushing things out of my head.
Yeah.
But as soon as somebody offered me, the chance to go anywhere that was going to be safer or where I was going to have more privileges or whatever, I would take it, which is what exactly happened,
Yeah.
Like I all of a sudden they said, "Yeah, we're standing now in Phu Bai," and so head on down to Da Nang, Not only that, head to 24 Corps, which was like the best place to be, so yeah. And I mean, I mean, I've only found this out since I've been sober, but I mean, I always kind of intuitively knew it, that I was a compassionate person, and I have like a very kind of like soft spot in my heart for a lot of people. When I was a kid growing up, I protected a kid who I now know was autistic. I mean, how freaky, I have a 29-year-old autistic son, but when I was growing up, I was protecting this guy, Billy Lockwood, all the time, who was getting bullied all the time because he walked around going like this, like, which I now know is a very autistic thing to do. It's called stemming, and then I had this other guy, Teddy Fast, who was blind, that I was teaching sculpture to, I mean, I always had but I kept this like tough man facade because I stuttered and I'm dyslexic, so I thought I was stupid. So if you made fun of me, we got into a fight, But I had guys who bullied me, and stuff like that. And I would, if you bullied somebody else, like Billy or Teddy, you're gonna have to mess with me, and I didn't care if I lost, I just would fight you until you stopped or I was out, and that's how I fought, and I did the same thing in Nam, I just, and I did the same thing in basic and AIT, I did it because I needed to do it, I was the guy in the back of the pack, helping the stragglers, my the head of my platoon would put me there because I was good at helping people along,
Yeah.
And so that's, what I, continued to do. And now, like my wife and I got divorced over this. Once I got sober, I realized that that we couldn't stop blaming each other, for the loss of our son. I blamed her mother for moving us down there, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what Jackie, had against me, but she might have. I don't know. Maybe she didn't. But I just can speak for myself. And so, and I when I was 2 years sober, I knew I needed to get out of this relationship. And I would tell people, it's not that I don't love her. It's just that I can't live with her right now, and it was not her fault. It was my fault because I didn't know who I was. I had no clue who I was. I had lost myself in all kinds of things, just a multitude, Vietnam being one of them. I lost myself there, because I needed to protect myself. So how are you going to protect yourself and be true to who you are, So I had to do that. And so I left my wife, and it ended up in a divorce. I didn't think it was going to end up in a divorce. And then, right when I was starting to feel good about who I was, I felt like I knew who I was now. I get this bang on the door, and it's my wife, and her brother's dead. He overdosed on 5 nickel bags of bad dope. And so I, that's what brought us back together. So one death broke us apart, and another death brought us back together. So kind of freaky. And then she had become a born-again Christian because he had become a born-again Christian. He actually was sober, her brother Billy, right? It's my son's name. But through a born-again Christian outfit called Teen Challenge. And we would always have this kind of like little tit for tat thing, where he would tell me, if you just come to Jesus, Jesus will remove the, alcoholism from you. I say, yeah, you just come to AA, you'll learn how to live with it. And, so anyway, but also, not to talk bad about it, because I don't talk bad about religion. It's like, it's not for me, but I mean, it's helped millions of people, billions. But they basically turned their back on him when they found out that he had AIDS, because he was a needle user, and they turned their back on him. And one day, 2 weeks before he died, I came to my wife's house. To this day, I don't know why, to pick up something. And he was on the couch and he was watching basketball. Extremely good looking man, right? Olive skin, black hair, blue eyes, could sell ice to Eskimos, very charismatic. And he was on the couch and he didn't get up to say hello to me. So I kind of like, hey, what? You're not going to say hello? And he reluctantly got up, and when he turned to me, I could see in his eyes that he was high. I was like, oh, man, And 2 weeks later, shot up this bad dope and fell down a flight of stairs and basically suffocated to death. He broke his neck, and he was laying there for like an hour, But, so that brought us back together. And then, we were fooling around, and then Jackie was like, I can't live in sin. So we ended up getting married again, And then I had been taking care of border babies with Patrick up at Harlem Hospital. But now I'm 45, and now Jackie's 44. And we weren't getting her pregnant. We were trying. We were seeing doctors. We were doing all kinds of things, And I said, listen, why don't you come up with me to Harlem Hospital? We went up there Thursdays and Sundays, And so I introduced her to that. I said, look, all these kids are going to need a home. They're border babies who were born to mothers who are drug addicted or alcoholics. And sometimes I'd spend a couple hours up there. Sometimes I'd spend the whole day, depending on how many kids were in the ward. And so that softened her up for that. So we started looking into adoption. That's a hell,
Yeah.
That's horrible. But one day, this woman calls, and she, by now we were pretty hardened. We had been doing it for like 8 months or something. And, she was talking to us about it, and I kind of stopped her. And I said, "Do you realize you're talking to a white male?" And she goes, "Yeah, you're talking to a black woman?" I said, "Yes. Are you okay with that?" And she goes, "Yeah, are you?" And I go, "Yeah. Okay, let's keep talking, And that was it, because I don't want to waste anybody's time, and so, and I really liked her. She was really sweet. And so, and then everything was going good. We hired a lawyer for her and blah, blah, blah. And we were looking at it. She was from Warren, Ohio. And the only thing Warren, Ohio had going for it was Trumbull County Prison. Right. So she was living there because her house had burned down in Cleveland, and her husband died in that fire. So she was living with her cousin, whose husband was in prison, Trumbull County Prison. So, anyways, we're making all kinds of arrangements and blah, blah, blah. And then one day she calls and she goes, and I'm paraphrasing now, she said, "Guess what? I had him. Guess what? He's white. And guess what? I'm keeping him." And we were like, "Oh, okay." Have a great life, and hung up the phone, cried a little bit. And the next day I was going to London to photograph the head of British Petroleum. So John Brown. Yeah. And anyways, the head of British Petroleum. And then because of now what was happening with the adoption, my wife said, "Look, I had a good friend in Ireland, and I had never been to Ireland, even though my whole ancestry is from there." So Jackie goes, "Why don't you go visit Patty? Just finish that house, take some time off. We both need some time off, So that's what I was going to do. I did the photo shoot. I had an assistant that I used to hire a lot in London. And so she was I was going to give her the keys to the studio because she wanted to come to New York. So I said, "Okay, I'm going to go to Ireland. You take all the equipment and bring it back to New York and put it in my studio. You can stay in my studio for 10 days if you want, So that's what we decided to do. We're sitting at lunch, in London, and her phone rings. This is 29 years ago. 29 years ago. And I didn't have a cell phone, but in Europe, they had them already, So her cell phone rings, and it's Jackie. It's my wife. And she goes, "It's your wife." And she hands me the phone. And again, I'm going to paraphrase, but she goes, "Guess what? She changed her mind. You got to come home," And so I was like, "Okay, let me make some arrangements," And I start telling Storm, my assistant, this, and we're still really good friends. And then I started crying, and Storm just like reached in my pocket, took out my tickets, started making phone calls, got me on the next flight to Cleveland. And I flew 13 hours from London to Cleveland. And I wrote Billy a 6-page letter while I was on the plane, and which I've never had to give to him because he's autistic. Right? I thought when he grows up, he's going to want to know, So, anyways, so I landed in Cleveland, got a van, drove to an hour and a half southeast of Cleveland to Warren, Ohio. And then even then it was kind of like all confusing, because nobody had cell phones. She was supposed to meet us at McDonald's, but didn't show up. Right. Then we heard that there was a McDonald's on the other side of town. So we drove over there. She didn't show up there. We call in the lawyer, right? The lawyer goes, "Listen, you were right." And I was like, "What do you mean?" Because I had told him that Ohio some counties in Ohio had very strict adoption laws, and this was one of them. Right? So he goes, you were right. You know, you're going to have to, the only way you can do this adoption is to fly everybody to New York. So that's what I said. So I said, all right, give me the address. I'll pick her up. And we'll go to the airport and I'll get her a ticket, you know? And so it turns out that she was dyslexic and she gave us the wrong address. And I'm driving up and down Jackson Street. It's getting dark. It's February. It's starting to snow. Right? And all of a sudden, this big blue Cadillac pulls up next to me. And this big black guy with this huge afro goes, I see you past the house. I go, excuse me? He goes, I see you past the house. I said, and you are? And he goes, I'm Sue Ann's brother. Follow me. Right? And he's now dead. He apparently caught a bullet. He was a drug dealer. But anyway, so I turn around and go, pull in. He pulls in behind me. He gets out. I get out. He's like this big guy. He goes nose to me. He goes, you taking that white baby? I go, think so. He goes, good. Nice meeting you. Turn on my heels. Walk in the side door. There's a woman cooking chicken in this big vat of lard, right? There's an old guy sitting at a half table drinking wild turkey, right? Out of a jelly jar, right? And he looks like Rodney King, you know, like that promoter, right? And except skinny and little and no teeth, you know. And then there's a kid laying in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, and the woman cooking is kicking him. That's how small the whole area was, you know. And I just stepped over him, and there were three little kids huddled together. And I go, "Where's the baby?" And they go, "Over there," you know. And I see this dilapidated couch, right? And I go, "Can we turn on some lights?" They go, "No lights." I go, "Oh, okay." And then I see the computer, like she had a SID baby. So the doctor that delivered Billy, 5 weeks premature, right? Almost over a month premature, said I wouldn't let her leave the hospital without
to monitor the baby.
Yeah, to put a monitor. So I followed the computer cords into the garbage on the couch, and there was Billy. I'm sure those kids hit him. You know, they threw the stuff on top of him, you know, to hide him. And then Sue Ann, and she had a 2.5-year-old daughter, Jasmine, who I didn't know until she came out. Who's that? You know? And so she came out with 2 garbage bags as her suitcases. You know? And so, so we put everybody into the car, drove back to Cleveland. Meanwhile, Jackie couldn't even walk into the house. You know, she was like a deer in headlights. You know, I go, okay, let's get into the car. I got Billy in my arms. I got the monitor on my shoulder. And
how was that to pick him up?
Yeah, it was surreal, you know. But I had been 2 years taking care of babies up at Harlem Hospital, you know. So I was very comfortable, you know, very comfortable. Plus, you know, I had a big family, you know.
Yeah.
One of my sisters is 10 years younger than me, so I remember her as a kid, you know, as a baby, you know. And I just always, I'm like the Uncle Buck in my family. You know, all my nieces and nephews, you know, they all think I'm like the greatest, you know. And I mean, might be one or two that think I'm an asshole or something, you know. But you know, like I feel comfortable around kids and animals. I always have.
Yeah.
You know? And so so, you know, and that was it. You know, it took us 8 months of constantly going to this place called Children's of the World in Montclair, New Jersey. We had to bring Billy there once a month for 8 months. And then finally we went in front of a judge. We had to move them from New York. We put them in a hotel in New York, and then we had to move them from a hotel in New York to a hotel in New Jersey because we couldn't get a judge to confirmed that they wouldn't have to go by the Ohio laws, and I won't even go into what they were. They were like crazy. But anyway, so we moved them to New Jersey. We fired those lawyers, right, that we had. They ended up breaking up. There were two women. And we got this great lawyer. I can't remember his name. I'd have to look up the paperwork to find out. But he was great. He was like one of these really, don't worry about a thing. We're gonna make this all work out, you know. And then one day, you know, like after like the 8 months of the protocol, you know, because she could have changed her mind anytime within, but we knew she wasn't, you know. And so one day one day we get the call that, you know, you got to stand in front of a judge now. They got to like make it legal. And we get there all dressed up, me and Jackie, and we meet the lawyer out front of the in front of the courtroom. And he says, listen, he goes, I don't think Jackie should talk. I think you should do all the talking and just say yes and no to these questions, you know? And so, okay. You know, so we get there, it's like really Ironside kind of thing, you know, courtroom with the judge and all that, you know? And he, to his credit, he was a really nice guy. And he looked at me after like I said my name and he goes, are you okay, Paul? I said, I think so, Your Honor. He goes, well, I'm here to tell you that you're just going to answer these questions and everything's going to be A-okay. And I go, well, thank you, Your Honor. And he did that. And it was really, you know, very like a breeze, you know, and then we walked out and me and Jackie like broke into tears and we went to, Soho, went shopping. She bought something expensive. I bought something expensive. And that was it, you know, and then we went home and Billy was ours, you know. And then at 2 months old, at 2 years old, he was diagnosed with, he didn't speak. He wasn't talking. And at 2 years old, he was diagnosed with autism. And again, you know, we went, you know, we had a nice little cry and then we went, okay, what do we do? What do we do to help him? You know? And that was it, you know? And, you know, he's been like such a blessing. And then like around 8 years old was when he started talking. But really, he started singing. His first words out of his mouth were fun, fun, fun. And he sang the whole song, you know? And that was it. He was 8 years old. Now he's seen 46 Beach Boys concerts. He's been on stage with them 5 times. He's got 22 electric guitars. All he wears is Hawaiian shirts. You know, he knows everything you could possibly know about the Beach Boys and all old-time rock and roll. Like Chuck Berry. He got to meet Chuck Berry. He's he knows everything about Jan and Dean, you know, the Beach Boys, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, you know, all the old-time rock and roll. Chuck Berry, Carl Perkins, Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, Johnny Cash. He knows everything about those guys. There's nothing. You ever hear of the $1 Million Quartet? It's a Broadway show that we've seen twice, Billy and I, and Jackie. Jackie, Billy, and I went to one show, and then just Billy and I went to the other one. But it's about a day that happened in 1957 at Sun Studios. It's a real event where Johnny Cash, Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Carl Perkins, those 4, met at Sun Studios in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis, I think. And so the play is about that one day, you know, and they call it the $1 Million Quartet. And so when Billy and I went to see it for the second time, it was at a place where I know the head of security. So I asked him if he could get us backstage. And at the end of the show, he said, let me see what I can do, you know, at the end of the show. He comes up to our seats. He goes, don't go anywhere. You're going backstage. Right? And Billy had a sequence tuxedo coat jacket. It was in the summer, right? Tuxedo jacket that he bought, a Hawaiian shirt, shorts, and blue suede shoes, right? And we get back there, and they're like, "Whoa, who is this person?" So I tell them about Billy, and then I say, "Go ahead, ask him anything. He knows everything about you, you know, about your characters, right?" And so they did. They couldn't stop him. And then the guy who played Elvis Presley, he goes, I got one for you. And he asked Billy this question. And I knew that Billy knew the answer to that question. Not only did he know the answer, but he elaborated on it. And the guy was like, "Oh my God." He goes, "We got to get a picture." It's one of my favorite pictures. He has a slew of pictures from, Brian to, all the Beach Boys and, anyways.
Dude, you've lived an interesting life. You've had a trajectory.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. The thing is that I never really thought about it, like people say that to me when I mean, I don't know, I'm Irish, so I can know how to talk or whatever, or tell a good story. But yeah, I mean, that's what happens. I've never really considered saying no to much, like I'll go for it. I'll try it. I mean, I spent like my first 10 years in sobriety jumping off of bridges. Bungee jumping was really big at the time, So one of my friends says, "Hey, you seem like you would like to,
What was probably the most dramatic shift after you quit the drugs, the alcohol?
Well, I think for like the first 2 years, I was pretty mocus. And then it was when I thought to myself, you know what? I don't know who I am, and I can't do this, like going home to Jackie So it was, it was leaving Jackie.
Yeah.
That was a big break for me, I mean, it hurt me really bad. I spent a year stalking her,
How many years you guys apart?
I think it was a total of like from 89, and we got remarried in 94. So it wasn't all that long, 5 years.
Yeah.
And only maybe 2 of those were divorce, or 3 of those were divorce, or not even, because like we spent a while together before we got remarried. And we got remarried on the same date for my last one, September 18th. And it took me about 2 anniversaries before I realized, or I was told, that you think of it that way, like Jackie thinks of it from 1976,
right.
And I'm like trying to, like give her anniversary things for like 4-year anniversary things. And she goes, "Really? You think of it that way?" And I was like, "Well, don't you?" She goes, "No." And I go, "Oh, okay. I better change my thinking, So I did. So like this year will be 50 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's something.
Our first marriage was 76. So.
Looking back in Vietnam, what's your takeaway from all that for you personally?
Not much. I mean,
are you glad you did it?
I'm glad I did it because, it was I'm not upset about anything that happened in my past. I could be, and I should be on some of them, I mean, I'm not even delving into some of the things that happened to me as a kid.
Yeah.
But like, that's my trajectory. That's my past. That's what made me who I am today. That's what made me be the father that I am to my son. The husband I am to my wife. The brother I am to my sisters and brothers. The son I was to my parents before they passed. My father had a lot of shit between me and him, and I was able, like I think like 5 years into my sobriety or something, we had to sit down and, and we let everything go. And the same with my mother, although my mother was a little harder. My mother was always a little harder than my father.
Yeah.
And, but she had Alzheimer's in her last 7 years. So I wasn't really, able to, to be the son to her. And they lived in Florida,
Yeah.
Um, and, but she got to meet Billy and she got to, so Vietnam, I mean, I found out that I was not, I never thought I was a weak person or, somebody that would cower from controversy or, even the threat of death. And I think Vietnam confirmed that for me, So I've always felt that way about myself as from a very young age up, I was the kid who climbed to the top of the tree. I was the kid who wouldn't churn in bicycle tag, like I was that kid, I had, they called me when I first got shaved in boot camp, they called me Roadmap because in my head, I have so many scars on my head. They called me Roadmap instead of all the scars on my head, but that's the way I was. I was, and I never, I mean, I'm sure I did complain, but I felt like I never really complained about what was happening to me. Just kind of forge ahead, do it, get it over with, cover your ass, And in my family, my mother was the type that, if you were crying, my mother, I'll give you something to cry for, and she hit you again, So, like, so I always felt like I was, kind of tough and that I could, weather anything, and that includes, like even Jackie today, my wife, who I've been with since she was 17, I was 18, like, I know that she knows that she can depend on me, and I like that feeling because I've been that kind of person for multitude of people. And now with Billy teaches me more than anything. Billy's my real teacher, Autistic people, they don't know how to lie, cheat, manipulate, all of which I grew up with. I grew up with that, like that's how you got through in life, and I, and then when I got sober, I realized that doesn't serve me, my secrets don't serve me, my lies don't serve me, so I slowly had to get out of that. I mean, I didn't stop lying and cheating, when I got sober. I know the day that it happened that I decided I can't do this anymore. And that was, I told a lie in a group, in a psychodrama session that the person who was running the psychodrama person knew was a lie. And when I told that lie, she like looked at me and kind of, and then when we were leaving, she goes, Paul, maybe we should have a session this week before next week, and I knew, and I was like, God, why did I do that? I mean, it was stupid, right? It was a stupid lie that I just couldn't stop telling for some reason, and so anyways, I had to confess to everybody, the other 8 members of the group, and that did it for me. And then wouldn't you know it, like, without me any prompting, people would come up to me and go, hey, you want to have coffee after this meeting, like after an AA meeting? I go, sure. And then there was, I had a famous person ask me that once. And then I said, sure, and we went to have coffee and he was telling me that he's been telling people that he's a Vietnam veteran and he's not. And what should he do about it? And I was like, just stop telling people you're doing it, And I told him what happened to me and, and just stop telling that, like, what the fuck, Like I've had people tell me, like, it just, how that kind of happens, like where you just like, you do something and then all of a sudden all these people kind of come floating your way, to ask you your advice about that, And people tell me, listen, these aren't real glasses, And I go, what do you mean? He goes, I just wanted to wear them to look like I was smart. And I go, well, stop wearing them then if you don't need them. Like stuff like that. It's like the weirdest thing, And that started to happen to me, and I was like, and I think like even with like Vietnam, like I never really like people. I kind of like kept it as a badge of courage that I didn't talk about it. But I didn't want to talk about it because I didn't want to. It was so like outrageous in a way that I didn't want to lie about it. I think like I didn't want to. Or whatever. Like I just. I didn't think. First of all, I didn't think anybody would understand the magnitude that it had on me. And it wasn't until like guys like Brian and Pat and the other Patty Brown, that unfortunately you can't interview. That started to tell me, yeah, don't worry about it, man. Just, like you could tell us about it, and I would,
Yeah.
And I went back to Nam with Brian Dellett, and we didn't really talk all that much about heavy shit, in the plane or in the hotel, but like just being with him and being there, like I had, not that I really needed closure because I never went anywhere but Hanoi,
Yeah.
And of course I wasn't stationed there, but, so he had gone back and he had told me how it was to stand in some of the places where he was stationed,
Yeah. Well, thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you.
That was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Some good stories.
It's really a pleasure meeting you.
That was very good. Thank you. And thank you for serving, dude.
Yeah.
Thanks for being willing to go over there.
Yeah. We say, did you ever hear this? We say, welcome home.
Welcome home. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. You always know when you're talking to a Vietnam vet because they'll say
true.
welcome home instead of thanks for your service.
Yeah. There's something though to being willing to just go do it.
Yeah.
Even if it sucked.
Yeah. I mean, like I thought that was, I didn't complain about it at all. Really, and I still don't. It was the only one that really hurt me was that little girl, the 15-year-old girl. That really got to me.
Yeah.
And like when I first started telling that story, like it took me a long time to tell that story.
Yeah.
But I cried every time, and I notice now I don't cry. Yeah. But I cried every time when I first told that story. And now, it's healed, I guess. I don't know,
War brings out a lot of gnarly things.
Yeah.
In people.
Yeah. And nobody should have to. You don't need it. We don't need it. I don't know why people think that we need to control others. I guess it's human nature.
It's a human thing, don't you think?
Yeah. But it sucks. It's one of the things that suck the most about people who want to control instead of accept and let everyone be who they are.
Yeah.
Like this whole gay or trans or like what? What's that doing to you? Anything? It's doing something to you? Is it really hurting you? Gee, But people want to do it.
Yeah.
So, meh.
Thanks, brother.
Thanks, Gary.
If you or someone that you know isn't getting the VA benefits that you've earned, please click this link. We've teamed up with a group of experts that can help veterans build stronger VA claims and get the benefits they deserve. Please click this link for a free consultation.